scientist, and I'm with 314 Action, the Seattle chapter. So for those of you who haven't heard of 314, we're an organization that basically looks at the world and says, we have all these science issues that are under discussion in our policy-making decisions. We have all these technologies that are changing our economy and the way our country works. And on the other hand, we have a bunch of scientists and technology-trained workers who don't participate in the political process. Scientists run for office at much lower rates than most other professions, and we generally have been politically uninvolved. So 314 Action is a nonpartisan group that seeks to start to change that. So they do things like recruit candidates who are STEM workers to run for office, whether local or national. And they also get scientists involved in the policy-making process through outreach events like this one, and through things like lobbying for legislation, endorsing candidates in local elections. And we are the new chapter of 314 that's formed here in Seattle. This is actually our first public event, so welcome. We formed on Friday of this year on 314. But we'll be putting on a lot more events, everything from outreach to, doing lobbying for legislation and working for candidates. So we'd love to have you all there and participating. I have a sign-up sheet, which at the end of the event, if you're interested in hearing more about either our planning meetings or our events, you can add your name to that and decide kind of whether you'd like to be involved. So our event tonight is an event that seeks to train us all in how to better communicate with the public. A lot of times our discussions about science and technology issues can just become one person saying, well, these are the facts. I don't know why you can't see that. I don't know why you refuse to believe me when I tell you this is the truth. And that doesn't seem to get through to people. And there are reasons why that's the case. And there are better techniques that we can all learn to use. So the people teaching us those techniques today are Ariana here on the left and Joy here on the right. Ariana is a cultural competency trainer and communications trainer who works with people all over the world, teaching them how to better communicate across cultural boundaries, which is what we're trying to do if we are STEM people trying to communicate with non-STEM people. Joy works at the Pacific Science Center, where she helps trains the people who work on the floor of the Science Center communicating with the public every day. So we have two experts in the field of cross-cultural and science communications to teach us some better skills. So I'll let them take the floor.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
We're just going to tell you, we're just going to tell you a little bit more about themselves, myself, and herself. So like Julietta said, I work at Pacific Science Center. I train people who work on the Science Center floor, so if you've ever been there, if you go to the Butterfly House, or you see someone on stage or in the planetarium, or people taking out stuff on the floor, all of those people are trained by me, and they develop a lot of the programming that they deliver. I do want to make it clear that while I work at the Pacific Science Center, and that's where I learned many of these skills, I am not representing the Science Center right now. The Science Center is apolitical, so this organization is not associated with Pacific Science Center at all. This is me and a cause that I think is really important and that I believe in. So I am going to be talking to you a little bit about dealing with controversial issues on the floor, and Ariana is going to tell you more about herself.
So, my name is Ariana. I've been doing this kind of training for about 10 years now. I got my start in a program where I worked in rural Japan, and I piloted a 3-year social psych experiment for bullying reduction, and specifically focused around helping LGBTQ students in Japan not commit suicide or drop out at the same rate. They're wildly successful, which is really cool because it's a country that thinks that gay people really don't exist, or it's a foreigner problem, and they often see bullying as a positive corrective endeavor. Like, you're out of the norm and people are going to help show you that by beating you up. And so the skills that I'm going to teach you today are basically how I accomplished that. Because all of my superiors were like guys in their 60s who, if I mentioned anything about gay people, they were just, but it was effective and it was really, really successful. And since then, I've obviously left Japan, and I've been doing this training for a very long time now. And the stuff I'm going to teach you today comes straight out of clinical psychology. It's amazing. You can use it in your everyday life. However, I'm not a clinical psychologist. So please don't take this in lieu of therapy or anything like that. If you do this and it gets you into trouble or something, please don't let me. So yeah, that's the stuff about me. And our talk is going to be about how we all really care. Like we're all really desperate to try to bridge gaps between people. Like these issues matter, and you know, all the time people are like, oh, this is what happened in Nazi Germany, and how do we fight this? And like, it's, you know, climate change is happening, and the world's gonna end, and we're all like, how do I communicate with these people? And it often fails, and sometimes disastrously. And we get into things like what's called the backfire effect, which is when you give people facts that directly contradict their pre-held assumptions, they just believe what they thought already even more. And they just are like, no, don't hear you. And we can avoid that, and there are really good steps that we can take. There are also a couple of other issues that arise that prevent our communication. I'm going to give a really quick, brief overview of that. The biggest one is just cognitive biases. So this is something that literally affects every single one of us as much as we like to think that it doesn't. They arise because of the need to process a lot of information really quickly and effectively. And so some of it comes from just having too much information or not enough meaning. So like if you give someone a lot of science facts and they don't have any structure or context to understand what you're talking about, they're either going to forget it or they're going to start to connect it up to things that don't make any sense. And that's where you get into like conspiracy theories, because it's loose understandings of things that are real attached to the wrong other stuff. Then there's like, you know, a need to act fast, and we're not always sure what we should remember. Generalities are a lot easier to remember than specifics. And these things really, really affect everything we do. And so we have to recognize that these happen to us as well. And then there's another thing, it's a kind of a recent cultural push where people feel like saying, well, it's my opinion. It's sort of a carte blanche to say whatever they want and say something that completely flies in the face of all fact and just be like, well, it's my opinion, so what does it matter? And you're like, well, opinions can hurt people, and they're just like, it's my opinion. And that's also not really good. And this brings me to the main point that facts don't change opinions. I know a lot of people come to these kinds of events really being like, what witty quip can I give somebody, or cool meme can I send somebody to just change everything? It's like, it's not gonna work. Sorry. And I don't mean to disappoint you if that's what you wanted, but it's the sad truth that giving somebody a lot of information, a lot of facts is never going to change their opinion. Part of the reason, and this is true just completely independent of political affiliation or education level. And one of the big reasons why that is true is because oftentimes the things that we believe really strongly are connected to our identity, like hardcore. A really good example is myself. When I was a baby environmentalist as a little kid, I was hardcore anti-nuclear power for no reason at all. It was just environmentalism is somehow against nuclear power. I identify as an environmentalist, thus I must be against nuclear power. And I would argue with people like hardcore about how it's like the worst thing ever. And I didn't actually know what I was talking about, not even a little bit. It was just nebulous ideas. But it was so tied to this identity that I had as an environmentalist. And it wasn't until later when I got to college and I started to learn about nuclear power that I was like, okay, you know, it's a much more nuanced thing than I thought it was, and it's not actually contributing to global warming like fossil fuels do and stuff. So I was really, really shocked, and it, you know, very interesting experience. And it's part of what got me interested in this stuff. And so with all of this in mind, I want to ask you all a question. I want you to try to think of an example, maybe recently in your life, where communication broke down, where it just like totally didn't go well. And I want to ask you if anyone wants to give a really, really short and sweet example of something that happened. Yes?
I tried to talk to my mom about how Christopher Columbus wasn't like the best person ever. So that was fun.
Yeah, and what was her sort of reaction?
We were talking about Columbus Day, and I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't call it Columbus Day. And she was like, but Christopher Columbus, and sailed the ocean blue. And I was like, but Native American people.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good example. Does anyone else have another example they want to share? Dan.
I was arguing with my dad about climate change, and he said that the scientists just want the fame and the money. And I said that the money's on the other side. They need the money to have their industry, but he wouldn't understand that the financial incentive was on my side, not his argument.
Yeah, Yeah. And I think there's one more hand over here. No? Okay, yeah.
I was at a bus stop and a guy started talking about UFOs, and I didn't but I always, it's always fun territory.
Yeah, and these are all really good examples. They close family members, close friends, random people at bus stops. We're constantly confronted with really strong opinions, and we have to, know how to deal with it. And next, I want to ask you to think about a time where you were being told something you didn't want to hear. Better to think about something that was not super personal or super emotional, like your boss telling you can't get time off of work. It's a perfectly good example, so let's think about it for a second. So now I want you to think about what emotions did you have in that situation? Now, a lot of the time, the emotions that we have in situations arise not necessarily because of what the other person said, but because what we're imagining about the situation or interpreting, but also needs that we have that are not being met. So in that situation, what needs did you have that weren't met that made you feel upset? So now I think that this is a really good reflection to do, and I really encourage everyone to do this sort of thing really regularly after an intense situation. But the next step's what's really important. I want you to imagine the person who's saying this stuff to you, how did they feel in that situation? Were they like, I'm so tired of having to explain it to this person 100 times? Or like, why aren't they listening to me? So you imagine what were they feeling? And now try to connect that to what needs do you think they had that you didn't meet for them? So, I know this has gone really quickly. Normally I give people a lot more time for this, but we have a lot to do today. But I want to ask, for any of you, do you feel like this reflection helped you understand and contextualize that experience a little bit differently? You want to raise their hand if it helps? Think a little bit. Yeah. So, that's one of the core issues here, is that, like I had said before, a lot of the time strong opinions are related to identity. And in these intense science, political, social justice, whatever conversations there, we get a lot of emotion. And the emotion honestly has nothing to do with the situation that you're trying to talk about, and it's a lot more to do with the quality of the interaction you're having, usually because needs aren't being met. Things like, one of the biggest things that I hear scientists, social psychologists studying is that people who voted for Trump, the thing that they need the most is to feel respected. And they get into arguments with people who act like you're an idiot who voted against your own self-interest, and that's not respecting them, right? That's not going to make them feel respected. So the point is, giving people the right information doesn't work to change somebody's mind. So you're never going to just give them the right information and they have the right ideas. And then now I want to give you another anecdote where I used these skills really effectively, and it had a really awful result. I mean, it was kind of good, but it was also really awful. So I was in, it's this next slide. So I was in a class, and I had a classmate who I was pretty friendly with. He and I were not really close, but we got along really well. We was going to take lunch together. And it was a Japanese language class, and we were learning the characters for the different dinosaurs. And he just randomly said, I can't believe anyone still believes in evolution. How stupid is everybody? And it was completely out of the blue, and I was like, So I was really kind of shocked about that. So I started asking him questions. I didn't challenge him. It kind of was just such a shocking thing that I was kind of like, okay. And he actually had this idea here that the dinosaurs and humans coexisted, and that gladiators fought them, and I was just like, all right, yeah, okay. And that's how I felt. But I didn't express it, so I just kept asking him questions, and I got a really, really clear picture of where he was coming. What information did he already have? How was he feeling about this information? How he was incredibly, incredibly religious, and I respected that. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have different belief systems, and that needs to be respected as well. And so I understood what was happening, but I was feeling, wanting to engage with that. There wasn't necessarily a need to do it, but I felt very much like I need to correct misinformation. But I still wanted to use these skills. So a little bit of time passed, and I came back to him after lunch, and I was like, hey, you know, I was really interested in the statement you made earlier. You said that you're not sure why people still believe in evolution, and I've never really heard anybody say that before. I've not really encountered anybody, and I'm really curious about this. And would you be cool with having a conversation with me where we can talk about these ideas? And he was like, yeah, sure. And so I started off not talking about evolution as a big picture. I just talked about the human jaw. And I was like, hey, the human jaw is getting smaller. We all used to have 4 big wisdom teeth with 4 roots, and now most people don't have 4 wisdom teeth, and the teeth are really soft, and they have to be removed, and they only have like 1 or 2 roots, and the jaw is just getting smaller, especially since we invented cooking. And we kind of were going back and forth, and I was like, oh, so what do you think about this? And he's like, well, that's not evolution, that's a small change over time. And I was like, okay, well, so what is evolution then? And then he just went kind of pale and was like, okay. And he didn't come to school for 2 weeks. Like, legitimately, I like destroyed his entire understanding of reality. And he had like a nervous breakdown, and it was really and like I felt so bad because I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I didn't want to do that to you. But this is some of the stakes that we have here. And it worked out okay in the end. He thanked me for engaging with him. He came back with a new theory I hadn't heard of, which is like microevolution, where it's just like species can vary a lot, but they don't actually evolve. And I was like, you know what, we at least came to something new. So that's great, yes. And
can I interject right there?
Yeah.
Because Aria told me this story, and I was like, whoa, that's really incredible. And you told me that story as an example of like how devastating this can be for people and how hard it is. But man, some of the people I train, which is mostly scientists, they're like, yeah, right on. They're going for that reaction. And I feel like that's really understandable because we do want to change people's minds. We do want to make a difference in someone's lives. And we understand that that can be really devastating, but at the same time, we feel like that devastation is necessary to get us to where we're going, which is to try to get people to, you know, save our ecosystems and save each other and eat healthy and all of these different issues. But I just want to make clear that this is a really unusual example. And if you don't follow the skills Aria is kind of going to lead you through and the things I'm going to talk about, you're probably not going to achieve that, and that's okay. If your goal is I want to ruin someone's life with this, you're not going to have a good time, and neither are they. You're probably not going to get anywhere. You're probably going to make it worse. So, like, it's a great example, and it's really important to understand how fundamental this is to people's identity. But don't let that be your end goal. Don't let that be the thing that you're trying to do, because it is gonna shut people down. They're gonna feel that aggression. They're gonna feel that you want to destroy me kind of feeling, even if you're really doing it just to help. Okay.
And related to that, I have tried the same exact anecdote of the human jaw later, and met a lot of people who already knew that stuff and knew how to shut it down. And I was just like, all right, it's not the right tool to use here. So it's not perfect either. Unfortunately, we can't give you like the right things to just tell somebody to make the idea stick. And part of that is because you have to get to know the person first to know how to appeal to them. So now what I'm going to shift into is the actual skills. So how do we actually do this? I kind of gave you an example, but they're really good to break down. And I'm going to first give you a little preview of them, and then I'm going to give you some more things to think about related to them. So the skills I'm going to teach you come from, you can see them in 2 places. You can see them in clinical psychology and something called dialectical behavioral therapy. It was originally developed for people with borderline personality disorder. They are, I feel really, really bad for them because they're super maligned. Therapists often don't want to treat them. But they're the kinds of people for whom every interpersonal situation is absolute hell. They are in a world of pain because they're convinced that they're evil and they're afraid people are going to find out, and then everyone's going to hate them and they're going to be all alone. So they act kind of irrationally because of this pain. And these skills help those people who are in like the worst like emotional hell possible to communicate effectively. The other place you see it is in applied psychology and something called nonviolent communication. This has been used really effectively in Rwanda after the genocide. It's been used in the Congo to help child soldiers reintegrate migrate into villages they may have brutalized themselves. So if it can help in these really extreme cases, I'm telling you, it can help you talk to your uncle at Thanksgiving. Really seriously. So the background I want to give you now is, first of all, you have to recognize, again, these aren't about ideas, they're about needs and feelings, and we have to get at that. So the primary need that we have is the need to feel safe and to belong. So whenever you hear people say, oh man, Trump voters are so stupid, they voted against their own interests, you're really making a big assumption about what their actual interest is. So, you know, they need to feel safe, they need to feel part of their community, and moreover, our attitudes and our beliefs are far more shaped by our social communities than they are by any facts. I mean, none of us are very great reasoners. I mean, that cognitive bias slide is a very good example of that. And most people don't want to think, or want to think as little as possible because it's stressful. You know, if you have to think about every little thing you do in a day and the implications of it, and does this align with my personal philosophy? I mean, you'd never do anything, right? You just sit there in stress and existential dread all the time. So we want to avoid that. We want to like just go through life and do our stuff and have fun. Moreover, even of those of us who have like PhDs, right, can really only say that they know the sizable amount of information about a very specific subject, and probably a lot of people disagree with them. Right? And so it's like, you know, we don't really know as much as we think we do, and we spend a lot more energy dedicating time to finding information to help us feel confident in the beliefs and ideas we already have than examining what we think or trying to form new opinions. People get really stressed when they think about this stuff because they're afraid. They don't want to think, I'm a bad person, or I've wasted my life, or I've been a terrible parent. And it's often the things that are at that core of these like extreme ideas that they can have. Moreover, think about it. You know, we live in a very liberal city. If I told people, and I did not, but if I told people that I voted for Trump, people would think I was crazy. I would have friends who would want to talk to me. If you go against any dominant idea in your social group, you pay a huge price for that. And the need to feel safe and to belong is like a primary need for people. So it's terrifying. And like asking people to even think about this stuff is frightening for people. Next, back to this idea of what we actually know about stuff. For example, what do I really know about immigration? I live in a very limited universe, so I have to depend on the beliefs and knowledge of other people. I know what I've read, I know what experts say, I know what my friends think, but I don't have any direct experience with that. I haven't visited the border to see what's happening, I haven't researched immigration law, I don't know anybody who's at risk of getting deported, nothing. So when I'm talking to someone about how we need to do X, Y, and Z, really I'm just talking about my gut feeling about this situation based on some values that I have, that I've then like let blossom into some sort of hopefully coherent argument that probably isn't tied to very much. And it's probably a loose collection of sound bites that I've heard other people say. And that's what everybody's kind of doing. You know, we need to believe that we understand things in order to get through life. And the problem is too often these beliefs support ideas or policies that are totally unjustified. But ignorance and confidence can be a really lethal combination, and believing in conspiracy theories, simplistic explanations, that things won't really change, or sensationalized memes, they make us feel safe. Even if they're telling us that the world's about to end, at least we know what's happening, right? And so it's, yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about, related to this idea of what we know, I want you all to think about what a bicycle looks like. I'm sure we all know this. I'm sure when we were little kids, it was probably the center of our universe, right? Or for a lot of us. Really think about what a bicycle looks like. You know, it's got two wheels, but where does the chain go? Where are the pedals exactly? How does steering work? All this other stuff. There's something called the illusion of explanatory depth, which means we think we know more than we actually do. This is supposed to be that talk about this stuff is exhausting. I forgot. Forgot to go to that side. So this is. They took people and asked them to draw what a bicycle looks like, including people who ride bicycles every day. And none of these pictures make any sense. So think about that. Something that you might even interact with every day in your life, you don't actually understand what it is or how it works, despite the fact that you might think you do. Now, of course, someone who repairs bicycles for a living is going to be a lot better at this, but, you know, if you asked me to draw a bicycle, it'd probably look worse than that. So, next, what else is happening here? talked about the education and the ideas and the identity statements, but the next thing I really want to go back to is emotions. So like I said, emotions that we have tend to rise in response to the thoughts we have in an interaction and less what is actually being said to us. And most often we ignore what is going on inside of us. We don't take check-ins. We don't say, hey, am I getting like really stressed out here and being kind of a jerk to this person? No, I mean, we just think I'm a disembodied cloud of logic and everything I think is reasonable. And not really. And emotions, also people have this idea that emotions are fundamentally irrational, but that's actually not true. So a good example is people who get brain damage or a surgery that disconnects them from the emotional centers of the brain become pathologically indecisive. They literally can't make a decision. You ask them, do you want a red pen or a blue pen? And they'll sit there for like an hour being like, I don't know. And the point there is that emotions are actually integral to logic. They tell us, okay, I have a process, I'm understanding the situation, and they tell us, how should I react in this? Another really good example is people who don't have the ability to feel fear often die really quickly because they'll see a poisonous snake, and rather than think, oh crap, that's a poisonous snake, I need to get away from it, and they're like, oh, it's a snake. Cool. And then they get bit and they die. So, emotions are super, super important in helping us process what's happening and telling us how we should react to something. But what happens in a lot of these interactions is people start thinking like, this person doesn't care about what's happening in Syria because they're a soulless jerk. Or this person is just selfish, or this person's an idiot, this person is whatever. And if you start to think that, you have lost all hope for communicating with somebody. So, moreover, any communication that is negative, evaluative, or critical, wherein you often appear to have more authority, as people smell that from a mile away. Any sort of like condescension, nope, they're just going to be like, wow, this person thinks I'm an idiot, they don't respect me, why should I cooperate with this person? You know, like if you do that stuff, you've ended the motivation for people to cooperate. Moreover, in a lot of these conversations that we have, there's no follow-up that's ever going to happen. There's nothing like that. And if you get somebody who's like hardcore anti-science, right, they're super climate change denier, and you come in and you start to make them feel stupid or not respected, you're their bridge to science. And all you're going to do is increase this unhealthy and negative association that they have with science. They're going to be like, anytime I think about science, I get this feeling of being belittled, or feel like I'm an idiot, or that I'm stupid, so I hate science even more now. And you might be like one of the few people that they get a chance to talk to about this stuff, even if it's a random bus stop and there's like aliens. You know, it's like you're the that's a bid for connection and communication. And if you just come at it with you are so wrong, they're just gonna be like, okay, never mind. Why should I invest in this? So, you know, especially with these one-off conversations, you don't have any foundation that you've built with this person. And what ends up happening is the person just leaves feeling confusion and pain a lot of the time. Even if they're not consciously thinking, oh, I'm in pain, there's always pain there. Any interpersonal situation that's tense, it's kind of painful. And then in relationships that you do have with somebody, you're just going to actually make that connection worse, and you're not going to be able to build this relationship better. So, I know I've been talking a lot, and I want to get into the concrete skills now, because there's a lot of information to think about, but the first skill I'm going to teach you about is mostly for short-term interactions, but it can be used anytime. And the thing you have to think about is all of these handouts here, the interpersonal effectiveness skills, there's this really beautiful moniker that Dear Man, Give Fast. It's a really good way to remember this stuff. And the basic premise of this is that in any interpersonal situation, there are three main objectives: getting what you want, building and maintaining a relationship, or preserving self-respect. And you have to decide in each situation what is the most important. You know, I can tell you, working in retail, every day I chose to sacrifice my self-respect for that paycheck I wanted. And we make these choices all the time. So let's look at this first skill. So this first skill, give, is the one that you use in short conversations or to start to build a relationship. So the basic ideas is we have this give here, so it's gentle, so be gentle, act interested, validate the other person, and use an easy manner, meaning keep yourself relaxed. really check in with yourself and with your body, your tone of voice. And be gentle means like don't call them an idiot. And it also means ask questions. Do not come in being like, well, what about this and what about that? Just ask questions, get to know the person, find out where they're coming from. That's going to make them feel safe and respected. It's also going to make them feel like they're allowed to change their mind, because you haven't caught them being wrong and where you can go, aha, look how stupid you are. They don't have all the information. So you're just going to ask them questions, find out where they're coming from, and then just don't interrupt them, just listen to them. You have to act like you're interested. You can't stand there and be like, yeah, okay, you're an idiot. I mean, that's gonna really come off. So you should be like open with your body. You should lean in towards them. You should nod your head a lot. You don't have to agree with them, but you have to act like you want to hear what they have to say. The validate part is the one that can be tricky for a lot of people. Validation doesn't mean that you agree, but it means that you say something like, yeah, climate change is a big and complicated issue, and it's really hard to make heads or tails of it. Or, if you're talking to someone who's anti-vax, yeah, we all really want to do what's best for our kids, and it's really hard to know where we start, because there's so much information out there. And that's going to make that person feel like, hey, we have something in common, or we can see eye to eye, and that's going to make people feel safe to actually open up to you. And then keep yourself relaxed. So this is what you can do to build relationships. You get to an argument. If someone gets unreasonable with you, you can come back to this. Just start over from this. If you're trying to talk about something factual and they start to get really upset with you, just bring it back to this. If you're dealing with someone screaming at a bus stop about something, or someone who's really racist who comes in and starts saying awful things, do this. That's how you de-escalate these situations here. This is the basic framework of the nonviolent communication. So this is how you help keep people from shooting everybody in a building or committing genocide. Is you de-escalate them, validate the emotions that they're experiencing, say, yeah, it's totally reasonable that you're angry because the economy is falling apart. And I totally respect that. And then they'll start to feel okay, it's fine. So now I want to move on to, let's see here. This is a really good quote from Pascal, and maybe a lot of you know who he is, but he understood a very long time ago that you can't use facts to change people's opinions. I'll give you a second to read that. Okay, so the basic idea here, to put it really simply, is that you have to make it so that a person changes their own mind. Like that example I gave you with explaining evolution to my classmate, he came to that conclusion himself. And he came to understand it himself. I didn't tell him that. I just asked him questions and gave him examples and asked what they thought about it. And then he changed his own mind. And that's what you have to give permission for people to do. You have to say, hey, it's totally cool to change your mind. I've changed my mind all the time. It's awesome. And then now what I want to talk about is this next skill. And we're going to do some role plays related to this in a second. And this is Dear Man. So this is getting what you want. So it's an objective effectiveness. And the basic idea here is to make somebody not get defensive and to not get hostile with you. And it's also a way to make something into a team effort. So we have first here, you describe the situation, so you express it non-judgmentally. You don't talk about your personal opinions, you just say, hey, this is what's happening. And then you express how it's making you feel. Then you ask for what it is you want. You need to make it clear and concise. Then you reinforce, tell this person why should they cooperate with you. Then the next points are maintain focus. Don't let them take you off track onto another subject. Keep yourself clear and confident, and then be willing to negotiate. So a couple of examples I can give you is, they're not science related. Or imagine you're a boss and you have an employee who just keeps coming late every day for 2 weeks, and you're really pissed off about this. But you don't want to go scream at them because that's not good for the atmosphere. So you go to them and you say, hey, so as you're going to describe, I've noticed for the past 2 weeks you've been coming in about 20 minutes late every day, and we're really short-staffed here, and it's really difficult if not everyone's here. And you express, and it makes me feel really stressed and like I can't rely on you in this space. Then you assert what it is you want. I'd like to talk to you about how we can make the situation work for both of us and what strategies we can build to help you get here on time. You make it like a partner activity, and then you reinforce and say, this will make our work relationship more harmonious and it'll make everything easier for both of us. If he goes off and says, yeah, well, this other person comes in late all the time, you say, no, we're talking about us right now. We're not talking about that other person. That's a totally different subject. Don't try to get super angry, because angriness looks like defensiveness. And then negotiate. If they say, if he's like, you know what, I'm really not in the right place for this, or I'm really busy right now, you say, okay, yeah, can we talk about it at lunch? And that's just sort of thing. So this is obviously non-science related. And then you can sort of give people all of these different things to make them feel every step that it's safe and that it's okay and that you don't hate them. And then this framework is really good to just try to internalize in yourself, because we can get really lost in these conversations. People start saying things, they start making logical fallacies like red herrings and all this other stuff, and where they like, you know, really super like make a totally different unrelated argument that somehow seems related, or they start to take it to an extreme, or they say, oh, this is a slippery slope, and we care about this stuff, so it's really, really hard to keep track of it, and our own emotions are getting involved. So if you can really internalize this inside of yourself, it's awesome. Like, I use this every day of my life, and it's great. And if I have to send like a stressful email to like my boss or something, I just use this framework, and it's awesome. It usually works out okay. And so I really recommend it. So what I want to do here is talk about also the fact that, as Pascal said, before you disagree with someone, so say in a science context, right, I'll give you a quick example here. That's what I did with my climate, or my evolution denying friend. I said, hey, you know, I was really interested in the comments you said earlier today about people, you know, not believing in evolution and dinosaurs. I'd never heard anything like that before, and it made me want to really talk to you. So that was the describe and the express, and I would assert by saying, I was wondering if you wanted to like sit down with me and discuss these ideas in more depth, and I have like some examples and stuff that you might find really interesting. Would you be okay with that? And I think it would also be fun for both of us. I mean, you know, it's obviously something you have a lot of thoughts about, and I think it's really cool. And that was great. He was totally like on board with that. But a lot of people, if I approached it with like, hey, you know, can I teach you some stuff or whatever, they would really immediately put up these defenses. Or even if you just approach it in a less overtly hostile way, but you don't sort of break it down like this, a lot of people are going to be like, hey, I'm like a devout Christian, and I like believe this to my very core, and I don't really have time for people trying to challenge my beliefs because I'm doing my own thing. Why should I talk to you about this? Because you're just going to make me frustrated. But if you do it like this, you're like, let's make it a team effort, we'll have so much fun, we'll exchange ideas, and friendship is awesome. Then they're going to be like, yeah, cool, right, yeah. And then it is really possible to be friends with people who have completely opposite worldviews from you. So, moreover, if I immediately tell somebody the ways in which they're wrong, there's no incentive for them to cooperate with me. But if I start by saying, yeah, you know, you've made a couple of really good points here, and I think these are important issues, and that would be like the describe section, like I think you've made good points, and I'm interested in talking to you about this. You're now giving the party a reason to want to cooperate in the exchange. And it also lets you have the chance to voice your own concerns and opinions. And then if you can do this, continuing this idea of asking questions rather than just telling information. So if you get to the part of like, let's have a conversation, do not just get into the like, hey, let me show you like my thesis. They're not going to care, and they're just going to be like, oh man, this guy thinks that he knows everything, he's so fancy, and yeah, I guess I'm just like an ignorant redneck. But, you know, it's not effective. But, you know, a good point here is if I have an idea myself, I can claim ownership of that idea, as opposed to having to take someone else's idea and where I'm explicitly saying, I'm going to defer to you as an authority on this. And really, really nobody wants to do that. So what I want to do now is a small role play using specifically these skills here. I want you to like find a partner, and one of you is going to be a neighbor a person who's lived in an apartment building forever, and the other one's going to be this new young hip neighbor who just moved in and it loves drum and bass and listens to it all night long. And they live right above you, so you don't really know this person. You maybe pass them a couple of times, and they are your tormentor. And you want to ask them to maybe not play their music so loud all the time. And you got to make it so that this other person doesn't just think you're killing their buzz or whatever. So try that. It's totally okay if it's confusing and you start over a couple of times, but just find somebody next to you. Decide who's going to be the tormentor and who's going to be the person who just needs sleep. And so, you just try to use these skills. And I want to ask you, does anybody have any idea, like, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like, hey, this made me feel like I could approach these topics with people? Did it feel like, does anyone have, like, a reaction they want to share?
It felt like for conversations like this kind of topic, it's what I would already think to do. It's just not necessarily what I would think to do for like politically loaded conversations. But for like stuff like dealing with your neighbors, I feel like this is already basically the way I would approach it as like a normal interaction.
Yeah.
Except it's not emotional, right?
Yeah. I think you had raised your hand.
Oh, I was going to say something parallel to that, which is you have to kind of already have this framework in mind, because it's like really hard to think through like keeping yourself in check while also being like, I don't have any sleep, and like, you're fucking my life. Like you have to like really have that internalized so that you can be like calm and kind of be like non-emotional and make it non-emotional. Because I think some people would come into that and be like, hey, so you're impacting my life.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And someone else had asked about like, how do you approach this beginning thing? Do you just like go bang on their door? And,
Yeah, 1 a.m.
That is like a really big question. So one of the things, so just to recap, the give skills are what you should use always in the beginning if you can, to sort of like make a person feel safe. Obviously in this context, the give skills are not, they might kind of be like, okay, what do you want? Why are you ruining my, like listen to music and jamming out night? But see, it wouldn't be appropriate in every context. But if it's a short conversation or somebody you don't know, stick to the give skills and just make them feel comfortable and safe. If you have something you specifically need to ask for, or you're in a space where you've already built or established some sort of connection or relationship where it is safe for you to move into, let's have a serious conversation, use these skills. Now, in this context, one of the biggest things you have to consider is appropriacy of your timing. So if I were this person, I would think about, okay, like, how do I ever see this person leave for work in the morning? Probably not the best time to ask them, but I can get an idea of their schedule. But in this case, probably what I would do is go before they started to play the music, but about the time it's going to start soon. And what I would probably say is like, hey, I didn't hear your music playing, and I was a little surprised because you always play it, and it's really good music. I really love drum and bass. I'd love to get some music recommendations from you. And I've noticed you play it every night, and it sounds like really good music. However, for me, it makes me a little stressed because I've got this really crappy 9-to-5 job, and I have to get up really early in the morning. And it's because I live right below you, all that sound just goes straight down. And I love the music you listen to, but would it be cool if we could maybe you turn your subwoofer down a bit, or would you be okay with stopping the music earlier? I would pick one, think of the thing that you actually want to ask, and just be like, would you not use your subwoofer as much, or would you be willing to turn your music off or down after say midnight or something? And then when you're going to reinforce this, obviously it depends on the context. If it's something like they can get kicked out of the building for it, you be like, hey, this will make it so no one wants to kick you out of the building, or it'll help you have a better relationship with your coworkers. And sometimes it's hard to find that reinforced bit. But then the negotiate could be like, okay, let's try to find a different solution here for something like that. And you could approach it as the ask, being, is it okay if we talk about how to make this work for both of us? Don't be surprised if we use these things on people, especially people you don't know, if they just close the door on you or something like that. Because lots of people can be really unreasonable, especially when they're like, my need is to jam out every night, all night, and anybody who wants to interfere with that is a big jerk and lame, and they're, you don't know what people are coming from. So her question, or Julieta's question, was really good about, or comment about how to apply it to science spaces. And I gave some examples of using it as a framework to ask to start a conversation. And I don't focus on conversations related to science. Joy definitely does. And so she's going to go and talk to you now about ways in which you can bridge gaps in talking about science specifically.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So one of the reasons I'm here today is NSF funded a grant that got informal science communicators together to talk to them about how to communicate about climate change. And they worked with a group called the Frameworks Institute. The Frameworks Institute works on framing issues so that people listen to them. So they do this a lot in politics. They'll have like study groups, focus groups. They'll collect data on, like they'll tell the public something. They'll collect data on how people react, and then they'll ask them questions to see how their opinions have changed. Frameworks Institute does that, except they do it about social justice issues. And if you go to their website, it's mostly social justice, and then there's this one little box that says science. You can click on that, and it's got some stuff about climate, about agriculture, about conservation. It's a really great website. I highly recommend it. So they have done some studies about what makes effective communication about climate change. So that's kind of my area of focus, but I have found working at Pacific Science Center that these things do kind of apply to all controversial science issues. And I've done a lot of work and training on this, and what was really cool is when I met Aria, I was kind of like, well, this is how we do it, you know, this is how I teach science communication, and she was kind of coming from a psychology background, like, oh, this is these principles of psychology, and then we found out, well, you handle it in the exact same way. Like she said at the beginning, there's not a magic fix. I am not going to give you, just tell them this science fact, and everything will go well. Not the way it works. So I'm first going to talk about what Frameworks did, which is come up with these kind of broad frames of reference that people have when they don't agree with a specific science issue. And kind of knowing where someone is coming from can help you understand how to address it, or even just feel more comfortable because you're prepared for the conversation that you might have. So the first frame of reference that someone might be coming from, so this is like the stereotypical pitfalls of controversial science issues, is basic misunderstanding of science. Okay. This is the most common one in people's minds, and a lot of scientists especially approach things from the perspective of they've just got the wrong facts. This is definitely prevalent, and many people do have the wrong facts or don't really understand the issue, but I will say this is a kind of like minor issue. Because of what Aria was saying, that everybody's approaching these things from an emotional standpoint. Even a scientist who has the facts is still approaching it from an emotional standpoint. So if you go into it with the, like, I'm just going to give them all these facts, you're acting as though, like, we're all empirical, we all have the ability to be objective. You've got to admit to yourself that you are not objective. They are not objective. They're not going to hear you the way you want them to. So Aria's already said a lot about how just giving them facts isn't going to change someone's mind. So it's absolutely true. They might be coming from this frame of reference. I have dealt with people who are like, I just didn't know that, and then they change their mind, and that's great. Again, extremely rare. Probably not what's going to happen. Okay, so another frame of reference is science versus the media. And I think this has been on a lot of people's minds right now because it's becoming clearer and clearer that people don't understand science as an endeavor at all. And partly that's because of the way we communicate and the way it gets reported. Science almost always has to go through a filter, which is the media. And even we've talked a lot in like the past year or so about like what our media has become, how with so many news sources, so many people putting information on the web that's accessible to so many people, it's hard to know who to trust, it's hard to know where to get your information from. You click on something on Facebook and you don't know it's not real, you're just kind of acting within your bubble. All of that is contributing to these kind of misconceptions where people don't understand the scientific endeavor, but also it's just media reporting. So scientists collect data, they study, and they'll say, oh, I did a study and found the result that bacon might cause cancer in this very specific instance with this study group, and now we need to do more research. Media hears that and says, don't eat bacon, you'll get cancer. So the media wants to make things absolute because it's easier for us to digest, and they want to give us recommendations. So that's kind of their goal. Those are the things that are going to get them clicks or get them viewers or get them readers. That's not how science works. And even scientists themselves sometimes end up talking this way to reporters or even to the public because they want to make it digestible. They want to break it down and make things easy for people to understand. It's hard to understand that we're just talking about a collection of data and we don't actually know anything, but we kind of do because, well, most of the facts point to this. We have a preponderance of data. There's been a lot of studies, but there aren't actually absolutes. That's really hard to get across, and that's not really the way the human brain works. So understanding that people don't understand how science works can be really helpful. And a couple of things you will hear people say when they're coming from this frame of reference are things like, oh, there's a new study every week. Scientists change their mind all the time. This is really just politics. So when you hear those kinds of things, it starts to become clear, yeah, scientists change their minds, but they never really made up their mind. They were just presenting their data, and then they're going to go get more data, because that's what scientists do. So, yeah, when you start to hear those comments, that's kind of the frame of reference that someone is coming from. When I hear those things, what I love to do is just kind of take a step back, and instead of talking about the particular issue that they're addressing, talk about how scientists get their data. Talk about how science is performed. Find something they're interested in regarding science. We all use science in our everyday life, even the people who poo-poo it. And talk about that. Talk about how that happened, where we found that information, how we did those studies. Helping people to understand kind of the difference between the scientific endeavor and what they're seeing on the news or on their Facebook feeds. Okay. Another frame of reference is this is God, in case you haven't met him. So a lot of people get pretty nervous about this because some scientific facts do butt up against religious beliefs. The really important thing here is understanding that people can have their religion and accept science as well. Usually these things can be compatible. A lot of times people try to pit them against each other. Your goal when you're talking to someone who holds a religious belief shouldn't be to undermine their religion and convince them that their religion is wrong. The only thing you can do is the give strategy that Aria recommended. That's the most important, so that they can feel comfortable in a scientific space or talking to a scientist and still have their religion. One thing that sometimes comes up is like, well, I'm a scientist and I have a religion. That's great. You should share that. What you want to do is make a personal connection, and that's like everything Aria is talking about, is making those personal connections. You don't have to not talk about religion in order to have a good conversation about science. They're not mutually exclusive, so it's really important to accept.
And I'll actually point out that in terms of evolution, for instance, there's research showing that even though scientists' impulse is to avoid the topic of religion, avoid the idea that these two things might be in conflict, you'll do a much better job communicating with people if you acknowledge that these things may appear to be in conflict and then talk about ways in which they aren't necessarily. So just acknowledging that someone might be coming from a religious point of view can be a really good way to get at that give strategy, instead of just pretending it's not happening.
Yeah, and I mean, the important thing there too is establishing those personal relationships. I mean, if you're giving a talk, like, you should still acknowledge it, but like if you're talking one-on-one with someone and you're trying to avoid religion might be the most important thing in their life, and you're pretending that it doesn't exist. So this kind of fits into a broader category of a higher power is going to take care of it. So another aspect of that is Mother Nature. So with this, there's a kind of spiritual belief that like, oh, the earth is going to take care of itself, or the even spiritual view of the human body, like the human body will fix itself, or this is how it's meant to be, this is how we're born, this is where evolution took us. So this idea that like things are unchangeable because there's something kind of beyond my grasp at work. And then there's an even more scientific view of that, which is just like, this is Earth, this is science. Again, this is like evolution, this is all how it works, this is how it was meant to be, you can't undo it. You're too small to make a difference. So all of those kind of fit in the framework of, okay, there's some kind of higher power at work. Okay, And then the last frame of reference that people might be coming from is something they call big, bad, and ugly. And that's, they already agree with you. They already think climate change is a problem. They already think vaccination is a problem. But they're coming at it from a perspective of, this is hopeless. There's nothing we can do. All those people who don't believe in this stuff are idiots. Sometimes it comes into the like, I'm not going to do anything about this. I'm not even going to talk about this because it's too depressing. And sometimes it's, I'm going to go and basically evangelically convince everybody that they are wrong and don't know what they're talking about and they need to vaccinate their kids. Both of those perspectives are kind of a problem. So you might find, and I have found in Seattle, that this is actually the primary frame of reference that I run into. Most of the people I encounter, even at the Science Center, it's a self-selecting group, pretty much like agree with me that climate change is happening. But they're so depressed about the fact that we're not doing enough to stop it that they kind of have given up. So you could still have some productive conversations with that, because if we take that approach, we're not going to get anywhere. Okay, so I'm just going to put this up so you can review those kind of frames of reference. Again, the basic misunderstanding of science, which permeates everything, but again is probably not the most important thing. And then science versus the media, basic misunderstanding of science. Higher power, might be religion, might be Mother Nature. And then big, bad, and ugly, they already agree with you. Okay, so you can kind of assess where people fall in this. And mostly it's just going to help you be prepared for what to expect. Aria has already given you the tools of what to do when you encounter those things. And for each of them, it is the same. For each of those, you use that give strategy. At the Science Center, I call it yes and. Yes just means accept, and means ask a question. So see where they're coming from. Okay. And then in these series of workshops I did about communicating about climate change, they kind of talked about what not to do. So these are things that the media has tried over time, and they found that it wasn't as effective as you might think. So this first one is electric critters. You've all probably seen the sad polar bear, who represents the fact that climate change is happening. Sometimes it's penguins or other animals. This isn't the most effective kind of communication for several reasons. So this is specifically about climate change, but if you take a step back, really what it's doing is presenting a really sympathetic narrative that makes you feel sad and like empathetic towards someone or something else, and it makes you feel really guilty. Part of the problem with this is if your economy or your economic situation is falling apart and someone's trying to talk to you about polar bears, it's not going to make much of an impact. It doesn't matter to you that much. And you might think, well, those people are horrible that they don't care about the polar bears. But man, if you're trying to feed your kids, this is not the most important thing. So it kind of de-emphasizes the importance of the problem. It focuses on one little bit instead of talking about the whole entire issue. And the reason this kind of messaging gets used so often is because scientists a lot of times know that they are using facts too much. They're trying to apply to people's reasons, and that they should be applying to people's emotions. And so they're trying to make an emotional story. Well, that's great. And people's emotions are important, but you make it personal by connecting to that person, not about picking something random that they might not care about. So the problems with this is it might be disconnected to them. Also, so many people have used these stories that there's compassion fatigue that happens. They've already heard this. You can only care so much. You kind of have to choose what to care about. And if there are children starving in South Sudan, you might choose to care about that instead of this, which makes sense. Okay, so cute critters is one. And that's a sympathetic narrative overall. Okay, so this is crisis. This is talking about it as though it's the end of the world, which in many ways, climate change is the end of the world as we know it, and yet the planet will still be around. It's a big rock. It's gonna be fine. So when people say this, you have to save the planet, all of us are gonna die, or whatever, people can get really riled up. You can get them on your side for a little bit. But what you do is activate that kind of crisis behavior. They go into like fight or flight mode. They want to act, they want to do something, and that can only last so long. You can't live in that mode. If you do, you're going to be just really exhausted, and you're probably not going to get much done. Also, there's a confirmation bias that happens with like 2 weeks later when the world doesn't end. People are like, oh, you were wrong. Okay. This is incidents and accidents. So this kind of focuses on one thing that might happen that people will relate to the bigger issue. So Hurricane Sandy, there was a lot of talk about climate change. Many of you have studied climate change, you know it's pretty hard to connect a specific incident to the overall change in climate. But the bigger picture here is, again, that isolated incident, you're only going to focus on it for so long. It's only going to be in the media for so long. People are going to be really upset about it. It's going to activate the panic mode. And then, you know, we're not talking about Hurricane Sandy anymore, even though it was a big thing that we all remember. Okay. So this, too, is why the sympathetic narrative doesn't work, because you're pulling out an isolated incident, you're making one example, and then eventually they're not hearing about that anymore, so it must not be a big deal. Lastly, this is an example of just confusing messaging. I think a lot of scientists or people trying to talk about these issues think that this is the whole problem. It is a very large part of the problem. Scientists tend to use jargon. They tend to like mix their messages, like is this about climate change or is it about nuclear power? Like what really do you want to take away from this? People don't know what fossil fuels are. I ask people what CO2 is at the Science Center and they say, oh, that's water. Right? So, I mean, this is something really important to be aware of, but it isn't the whole issue. So yes, like, figure out how to break down big science concepts for people. Figure out how to make it digestible and comprehensible. Don't use jargon, but this isn't the whole issue. Okay. Any questions about any of that? Yeah.
Just the last thing you were saying about talking to people that they don't know what CO2 is. One thing that I struggled with is finding out where people are at in terms of their fact knowledge, so that I don't start saying things that sound really jargony, and that, I mean, I know when people start doing that to me, I sort of turn off. I'm maybe too shy to say, I don't understand what you're talking about, you're making me feel stupid. I know I feel that way, so I struggle with finding a way to gauge where someone's at in their understanding and what level they want to talk at about something without saying, how much do you know about this? That's weird.
It is weird, but there's a way to say how much do you know about this that is friendly and allows them to share, which is, what have you heard about this? Or like if they start telling you about it, you can say, oh, where did you hear that? I mean, that can sound like a super aggressive question, but it is a tone issue. So just saying like, oh, tell me what you know, or what have you heard? It's a little bit more like, have you seen the weather today, than like, I need to assess your knowledge so that I can have a conversation with you. So yeah, and what I do is I say, tell me what you've heard, and usually they'll say one thing, and I'll say, what else have you heard? And I just keep going, and sometimes I'll even frame it as a like, oh, I've heard this, or this is what I know, so it's a little bit more like I'm sharing rather than teaching. But I tend to focus on asking questions because it's so hard to know what people don't know. And the more you ask those questions, the more you're going to find out, like, oh, a lot of people don't know what carbon dioxide is. And so the first time you encounter it, you might accidentally use that term, and then, like, throughout the conversation, you might find out, oh, like, they didn't know that at all. But then the next time you go to have a conversation with someone else about that, you can say, oh, have you heard of this thing called CO2? And they might say, God, you're an idiot. Of course I have. But that's better than you talking about it without them having any idea about it.
Or are you just starting to talk about something that's too basic for them, so they feel like they're being talked down to? So it's better to gauge the level.
Exactly. Yeah.
how do you combat alternative facts? Because I found that when you start discrediting their facts, they start discrediting yours, and then you're in this loop of nothing being real, and we're back at opinion.
Yeah, that's like a really great point. I would say to every single thing that someone gives you, including alternative facts, you use give. It's hard because you're like, that is so wrong. but the idea is not to correct them. The idea is not to say, those facts are wrong, let me give you the correct facts. The idea is to use give to understand and then accept where they're coming from. So if you're going into that conversation with the, I need to make sure they have the correct facts, you're probably going to fail. You're not going to have a constructive conversation. If you're going into that conversation with, I'm going to listen and see where people are coming from. I want to get to know this person. You're going to succeed. You're going to be farther along in the helping that person be open to some new ideas.
Related to that is like, so when you encounter alternative facts, it's like I mentioned before, you have to really validate people. So there's usually like a core inside of that of like fear or worry or stress or like concern that's real and legitimate. So for example, if I encounter somebody who's like, these damn illegal immigrants are stealing all of our jobs, it's not useful for me to tell them actually immigrants tend to create more jobs and they're actually, you know, companies are shipping these people in illegally and it's not them. It's like they don't actually realize they're here illegally in a lot of cases. No, they don't care. They don't care. So I would ask a lot of questions and I might come to the other saying, oh, like this person is really, really concerned about the fact that their entire town was devastated when GE closed their factory there and now everybody's addicted to heroin and nobody has anything to do. So I could be like, so, I hear you're saying that you're worried about your family and your community's future when in these issues, especially related to economics. And I totally feel that way too. That's really important. And so you have this alternative fact that's like lie, basically. And you could just be like, ask them questions, what's that core idea there? And then bring it into a neutral space outside of that. And then ask them, you can also say things like, am I hearing you right? Is this what you're meaning to say? And that's also really useful.
Cool. Thank you. So right now, there's a little like piece of paper going around. And what I did is wrote down some of the things that people think or say in each of these categories. So you're only getting one. And this is, we're just going to try to do another role play. So role play might seem a little silly, but the great thing about this is even if you are completely like on the page of like climate change is real and it's happening, it's really great to talk to someone else who's on that same page to have these conversations as practice. So you're in a safe space. The person that you're talking to will probably be on the same page with these basic issues, and this is a chance to like practice some of those skills that Aria taught you. So what we're going to do is you got one of those little pieces of paper and you, like one of you will believe those things. The other will just role play yourself. And the person who is being themselves is going to try to figure out which of these kind of categories this person falls into. And then try to use the skills that Aria has taught you about give and even Dear Man to have a constructive conversation with them. So the goal is not to change their mind. The goal is to have a conversation. And then we're probably going to switch if we have time. Is everybody clear on this?
Not quite. Sorry, missed
Yeah.
who was who.
Oh yeah. So just pick one of you to be the like dissenter, the troublemaker. It can be the person who was like playing their bass really loud, and the other person is just going to be yourself. And then we're going to switch so that you both have a turn to practice like trying to have that constructive conversation. Make sense?
So the goal is
So much. How do you feel?
It was hard. It was hard to stick to your guns as a denier, like denying something from a perspective you don't believe.
That's a great point. Did being the like denier make you feel like you had a better understanding of where that person might be coming from?
Yep.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
He did a very good job denying, by the way. Almost had me convinced.
Great.
I felt really like hard to maintain like that not teaching or that not wanting to say, oh, that's so interesting that you think that. Well, this is how we make sense of that. This is like how it can be thought of differently and to refrain from that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. see what I did there? No, I don't have an answer, but that is what I do at the Science Center. And so like even me just doing that to you right now is a way for you to think about like how can I find out more of their thoughts and focus on them instead of focusing on what I want. And sometimes you can get part of it across in a question, kind of like I just did, but like ultimately your goal is to find out where they're coming from and get more information from them. Because sometimes you do uncover, like, they're like, oh, I'm not sure about that, now I'm curious. And that's great, getting them curious. See a hand there, and then there.
We took on the scientists just want the money thing, and I had literally no idea how to respond to that. Like, I couldn't even just say, like, why do you think that? Because, like, obviously people want money. And then I was just like, well, I can't just say, well, that's wrong. And I just had what happens when you have literally no idea where to go next?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, but I mean, what I try to do is think of what questions can I ask.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you might say that you can't ask the question, why do you think that? Because everybody wants money. But sometimes it's interesting if you ask the obvious question, you get a non-obvious answer. Because the people who are coming up with this, are thinking very differently than you about these issues. So even asking the obvious question is sometimes really helpful.
I also use "Where did you hear that?" as a way to buy myself some time. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Where did you hear that from? I'm curious.
Yeah, and that question too can seem kind of aggressive, where did you hear that? But that's a tone thing. If you're just like, oh, that's interesting, I wanna know more about that. Where did you hear that? It's friendly. Yeah, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So she was playing. My partner was playing the denier, and as we finished up and we're about to switch, I kind of went through my checklist. And I was like, okay, I was gentle, I was interested, I validated. She was like, well, you didn't validate, did you really? And it turned out it was true. She gave me a really clear emotional hook as to why she felt this way. And I was thinking, I was validating her ideas, but I didn't follow her and talk about that emotional vulnerability that she exposed. So kind of checking myself also and making sure that I really am validating those motives that they have.
The example was about I had just come from New Orleans and my city had been devastated, and but that's not something you picked up on.
Yeah, and even all of us have so many things we're trying to do and share in these conversations. In my job at the Science Center, a lot of times we're not talking about controversial issues. We're trying to teach people about whales. But I saw this amazing interaction once where this person came up and the staff member had this amazing hook. They're like, have you ever seen a whale before? And the person was like, yeah, I just went whale watching. And this person trying to teach about whales is like, great, now we're going to talk about baleen versus toothed whales. No. That's when you say, tell me about your whale watching experience. But it's very hard because we have all these that we want to, even if we're focused on not teaching, we're so focused on not teaching that we're still not listening to that person. So you had your hand up, and then I think Ariana is going to wrap this up.
So how do you train scientists to be your allies? Because the problem is we are intellectually violent scientists. We are trained to be intellectually violent, to crush other people. Right? You work with us. Yeah. So we're kind of used to intellectual sparring. Kind of. And so we need to kind of as you said, your advice is great, and actually I can use it when he talks in a conference. How do you interact with us and say, hey, you're smart, you know lots of things? That's where you get there.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is your colleagues or other people from those workplaces are coming from that big, bad, and ugly perspective. And it might not be that they're too depressed to handle their issue. It might be I believe in this so hardcore that I am going to pound my issue into their heads until they get it. But for that, it's just the same as all those other kinds of frames of reference. You still use GIF. And that's what Aria was saying about using this in everyday life as well. Because you have to accept that that's the way a scientist feels, and when I'm training scientists, it's not just I'm going to give this talk and then we're done. The scientists at we have a program where we train scientists to communicate with the public, and it is a series of workshops over 3 to 6 months, and then they come into the Science Center over and over again to interact with the public. And even then, it's still a lot of things to learn about communication, but it is kind of accepting where they're coming from, understanding why they're coming from that place, validating it, and then using Dear Man to get what you want.
You Mr. Spock. Like sometimes people imagine that we're not.
Yes, you're just very passionate about different things.
Yeah.
Right, and also there is, as you mentioned, as Ariana mentioned, like we are validated by our knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the person who will challenge, even within our normal professional
Yeah, I mean,
relationship.
the biggest thing I think is like understanding that yes, I do have all this data, I do know more than this person. That doesn't mean that I'm superior, and that's kind of hard because like, well, in knowledge you are superior, but you're not a logical being, you're not Spock. You all still have emotion, and for scientists to understand, like I'm still coming at this from a like really passionate emotional perspective is really hard.
I was going to say, this is also maybe a good hook to talk about like the values that scientists have, right? They tend to value what they consider objective and dispassionate data. And so if you can present them with data that argues for these kinds of communication strategies, that's a really good way to convince people that this is the strategy they should adopt, even if they don't want to, even if they feel like they know better.
Yeah, you notice how I started this by saying like go to the frameworks institute because they have actual data.
Right.
But, it helped convince me. I mean, I was like, oh no, sounds gonna feel good. Like let's all hold hands. And I was like, oh, you have data. I love it.
As a physicist dealing with like gender and STEM issues, we often find that having an experiment is the best way to convince other physicists that like this is a real issue.
Yeah, cool.
It's better than anything else I've tried, at least.
I think there would be a little bit more time for questions at the end, but I'm going to turn it back to Aria. She's going to wrap us up.
Okay, so there's a lot of information that you've been given today, and there are also lots of little odds and ends that I really think are important to address. So the first thing is that it's really okay if you don't get this stuff right, and you have to practice it. And it's also really okay if you get super emotional in these spaces. In your packet includes something called FAST, and that's for preserving self-respect. And so, like, I try to go out there, for example, and interact with white supremacists, and it's really helpful that I'm blonde and blue-eyed and really, really pale. I'm also quarter Native American and quarter Arab, and I get really emotional about this stuff. And sometimes I can just be like, this person makes me feel like my existence is like an abomination. And I know that about myself, so I can ask myself before I go into these conflict situations, am I okay with this? Am I like ready? Am I in the right emotional space? Can I do this? And if not, I just don't engage. And then if I think I can and it's going okay, but then suddenly the person is like screaming at me and give is not going to work in that space, I just use the FAST skills. And it's a way to make it so that afterwards I don't feel quite as upset about stuff, because you're not going to compromise your own values or your sense of integrity in those spaces. We don't have a lot of time to go into it, so I try to include like a really detailed description of what's happening. And you can Google these skills online, and a lot of the information is readily available there. And there's, related to that, we need to be accountable as people. We really, really need to be accountable. We need to recognize we do get emotional about this stuff. We don't know as much as we think, and we all have a lot of biases. And that's okay, but we have to recognize that, you know, the person I'm talking to is not my enemy. They are a maybe friend. And we are going to have an adventure together. And that's how I try to think about it. And related to some of the questions people have been asking, it's also really important to do your research. So I have a really good friend, and I've known her since I was a little kid, and she's a hardcore liberal, and she was super into climate change, and then one day she started talking about chemtrails. And I was like, what is chemtrails? And I thought it was a joke. And then it turns out, so for people who don't know, it's people who think that climate change isn't real and that the condensation lines behind airplanes is some giant global conspiracy for weather control. And it's, yeah, I had no idea what to do in that situation. So I went and I researched it. I read everything I could find. And then in social justice things, you know, if you're talking to like a hardcore libertarian who has all this stuff that's really damaging to, say, like, poor people of color, well, well, I need to understand, like, what is negative liberty? That's like the foundation of libertarianism. To be good at this stuff, it takes a lot of effort, and you really got to research your stuff. You got to also remember that you're emotional. Check in with yourself while you're doing this, like checking in and asking, am I actually validating this person? This stuff's all really, really good. Do your best not to ever make it into any sort of personal attack. You know, a lot of people they'll say someone's like, say, an anti-vaxxer and they're a parent, and they'll be like, why don't you care about your kids? Like, do you want them to die? That's just gonna, everybody's afraid that they're gonna screw their kids up, right? It's kind of the curse of being a parent. I mean, I've never been a parent, and I can see that in everybody I know who is a parent. They're like terrified all the time. So if you tell somebody that, they're just gonna shut it down. But if you say, hey, you know, in our culture, it's totally normal to take extreme measures to do the best for your kids, and I really respect how much effort you're putting into this, you're gonna get a lot farther with that person. And then related to that, a lot of people get obsessed with ideas of delusions. I remember when George Bush was president and he talked about talking to God and hearing the voice of God. Everyone's like, he's a schizophrenic, he's hearing voices. And really freaked out and thought he was delusional. The problem is, or the framework I would use, in psychology, that is not considered a delusion. If it's within a well-established cultural context, no matter what it is they think, it's not a problem. If I have somebody come to me who's like a neo-druid and they're really into ley lines, and they think the magnetic lines in the earth influence everything about themselves, that's not a delusion. I mean, paganism and like neo-spiritualism and stuff, that's a cultural context that we exist in, and it's well, it's kind of fringe, it's within this organization. But if I have a woman who's a kindergarten teacher who thinks her kindergartners are emitting, you know, magnetic fields and they're controlling her thoughts, okay, that's a delusion. Right? It's really different. There's not this cultural context. Related to that, don't tell somebody what they're thinking is a delusion, and if you're actually interacting with a delusion, don't acknowledge that, because that's not going to work. It's just going to make them more stressed out. A good example is,
how can you tell? It seems like it's hard to tell what is a delusion or not. Though. Like your example of chemtrails, for instance, when you first heard about that, you had no idea what that is. So from your perspective, this is someone who's just totally made something up, and they're completely crazy. But there is actually like a community of people online who talk about this, and like it's a community. It maybe didn't exist really as a community before the internet, but now every fringe belief has its own community to a certain extent.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Like, how does that play?
So it's a very, very good question. When I found out about this, it was on Facebook, so I had the luxury of doing research before I talked to her. But if it's in a personal situation, just use the give skills. Just ask a lot of questions and find out where they're coming from. And recognize that conspiracy theories are part of our cultural context. And it's really hard to disprove them because there have been a number that have turned out to be true, like the FBI orchestrating the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and all that other stuff. Like, everybody thought it was a conspiracy theory, and it turns out, okay, yeah, they actually wanted to kill him. And they, you know, I don't know if that's something not everybody's heard of, but there are like, there's a lot of blank faces, so I was like, oh, okay, we don't know that stuff. But anyway, there's a lot of things that have were called conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, and so that just adds credence to this. And then especially with conspiracy theories, the underpinning there is that there are global nefarious forces that operate in secret, and when you directly counter that and deny it, you are just further proof that even well-educated people are blind to this problem, and that those nefarious forces have even more power, and so it really, really, really doesn't help, unfortunately. It's really good to know as much cultural background as you can, and the best weapon that you have is knowing who somebody is. Somebody's a hardcore Christian, and you know they really love Jesus, appeal to their sense of charity. And be like, well, you know, maybe you don't really care about renewable energy, but what about the coal miners and the sacrifices they make for their own body, and like the black lung that they get, or like, you know, someone's like super into economics, you can talk about energy freedom. They will love that. Just think about how can you reframe it in a context that's going to appeal to them, and use that in the dear man part, and be like, hey, can we talk about this? And then, you know, put forth the ideas, but let them talk, hear them out, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I talked about conspiracy theorists and that. So the other thing I want to talk about is really hard is in every situation, aside from those like 3 points, you have to decide what is your actual goal. Do you just want to like feel good and make the other person look like an idiot, or like share a really sensationalized, hilarious meme? Well, you're not going to change anybody's minds. The only people who are going to look at that meme and be like, yeah, are people who already agree with you. They're not going to reach out to anybody else. And they're just going to be like, oh, look at this jerk doing this stupid thing that they share. I mean, like, I get into arguments every day on Facebook. It's kind of a hobby of mine because it's fun. But in those cases, I know that I'm not trying to change this person's mind. I like to debate. I was like debate chair in high school and college because it's fun and I love mental sparring, so I approach it like that. But if I actually want to change somebody's mind, I have to set that side of myself aside, right? I have to like just be like, no, that's not in this space. I'm not going to make this about me. And it's really tough because you'll get people who will talk about science that's actually really racist and supports like oppression of groups of people, or like economic policies that are literally causing people to like die sooner and stuff. And it hurts and you care about it and you want to just be like, don't you see what you're doing? Don't you see how you're like complicit in this evil thing? That's not going to change their mind. If you're really committed to that, changing their mind, you have to build a relationship with them. You have to make them feel safe, like they can change their mind. You got to validate them, and it sucks. Really sucks. I've had too many conversations with like hardcore white supremacists who literally think Native Americans don't exist, and I'm just like, right, I'm gonna keep doing this. Keep asking them questions and see if I can direct them someplace. So related to that, when you get into trolls, people who are legitimately trolls just do not engage, basically. So this is a quote from the philosopher Sartre in France just before the outbreak of World War II, and I'll give you a second to read it. Basically, the point here is that people who are trolling you, people who are like hardcore, like white supremacists or anything, and they're in this space, they want you to get upset because that's fun for them. And they don't need to back up what they're saying with any evidence whatsoever. They don't care. They just want to watch you squirm. And we care about this stuff, so we think about our words, we choose them carefully, we try to be really good, and all the weight is on us. And they are loving it. They're loving every second of it. So don't try to confront them directly. If you do decide you want to try to engage, just focus on the give. One of the things I love to do is like, somebody says a really racist joke, I'll just be like, well, I'm sorry, I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? And then I just keep saying that until they get to a point where it becomes really obvious that it's a really gross thing that they just said, and then they kind of are like, okay. Or they're just like, yeah, and I'm just like, I really feel like that idea should have died like 50 years ago or something. This is really not funny for me. And sometimes it is totally appropriate to just give that kind of response, especially if it's not connected to someone's identity or supercharged. If it's like a social situation like that, you can sometimes just kind of push back against things. Be very careful with that. So that's the trolls. Just leave them be. They're very sad people. So the next thing I want to talk about is a really cool example of awesome ways in which we can trick ourselves. So what is aging? Anyone want to explain what exactly aging is? It doesn't have to be a great explanation in a couple sentences. It is going to be like the bicycle thing, yes. So what is aging, right? Your cells get worse at replacing themselves, and this happens in every system of the body. And you know, everything gets worse. Your eyesight, your back's gonna hurt, your skin's gonna not be as tight as it used to be. Everything's gonna change. And it's kind of intense, and it happens to everybody, different rates. Some people are really lucky and age really slowly, but it's gonna happen to everybody. Next thing I wanna ask you is, at what age does it start to become unsafe for a woman to have children? 8. Yeah, like,
what does it mean unsafe?
What is unsafe for you?
Were there risks for like cognitive defects or autism?
What is high risk? What is
Too many scientists in there.
I know. So I mean, at what point does it doctors start to recommend women not have children. It is like mid-30s, right? And like it's a lot of people know that the older the mother is, the higher the risk of autism, right? What about, and that like usually menopause happens and women can't have children anymore, even if they want to. What about for men though? Like at what age can a man like stop safely having children, or like can they actually just have kids for their whole
Well, just
life?
because the way men reproduce their sperm is different how we do our eggs, so that's why they kind of safe all the time.
Yeah. And that's the dominant idea, right? Is we feel like, men can reproduce for their whole lives. They can still produce sperm. It's definitely true that you can. And it's, a lot of people have used that argument to excuse really not so great behavior, just constantly divorcing women to marry younger women. Because they're like, I have this instinct to breed, and look how virile I am, and stuff. And it's connected to a lot of identity. But starting about 10 years ago, a lot of science started coming out that said, actually, no. Every part of the body ages and testicles are not magic.
Damn.
But the thing is when this stuff started coming out, and there was a couple of different scientist groups that were researching at the same time, the academic community tried to get their PhDs taken away. People flipped out. Scientists started threatening them, harassing them. It was like a big deal because there was too much sense of identity and value tied to the fact that men can reproduce for their whole lives. It was a way to show, a lot of people felt like masculine superiority. There was a ton of like gender stuff and social stuff tied up in this, and we have all these cultural symbols related to like masculine power and stuff, and so there's this emotional context there. And I'm not saying that any of that's bad. I mean, we can all celebrate all the cool stuff we can do. It's awesome. Yes, let's be excited about being people. But there was value statements here. So when this research started coming out, the academic community was like, no. But then you think about it, okay, what is aging? Every part of the body ages. Testicles are not magical, so they do that. And research has shown, that after 35, the risk of having a child with defects or the number of like defective genes in the sperm starts to go up about, it's like something like 50, around 35, you'll send 50 like bad copies of something on average per sperm, and then every year it goes up by 2, so that very quickly you get into a space where you have a lot of defective DNA that is transferring. So, but that made a lot of people really upset. Nobody wanted to hear that, and obviously there are outliers, there are lots of outliers, but it's been one of those things. So scientists are not, above this. We all get really attached to the ideas that we have, the worldviews that we have, and we need to be personally accountable. We need to ask ourselves, where is this coming from? Am I getting emotional here? Why am I getting emotional? And be honest with yourself. It's totally fine to be emotional. I mean, it's kind of exciting in life to have emotions, right? So you just gotta just own it. And so that was the last part of that I wanted to share with you, and now we'll take questions.
On that topic too, something I've thought about or noticed in scientific literature is like there's a lot of science published that has kind of questionable methods or things weren't done perfectly, but it's not retracted. But if something's published that goes against scientific dogma, like something published about GMOs is negative, or vaccines is negative, like it would be held to a higher standard and more likely to be retracted for something like not the right mouse strain, or like small issues that weren't like standards that aren't uniformly applied across scientific literature. And I think that's one thing too, where scientists are using their value statements to like judge things differently based on their.
A really good point, partly because some of these people who are like deniers use this study, like they'll use one and scientists will just completely dismiss it instead of treating. I mean, sometimes scientists didn't do those studies, but like that, like sometimes scientists do, and like even a scientist who says that they're so objective and is respecting the facts and the data is not like respecting that particular study. Obviously, like scientists work with a preponderance of data, so it can't just be about one study, but that also means like when you're talking to someone, you can't just dismiss it out of hand, and that kind of falls into that like science versus media issue where they don't really understand how science works, but that doesn't mean you say, you don't understand how science works, let me teach you. you try to find more examples like that, or ask them like, oh, have you read anything else like that? Which, I mean, it seems like kind of a trick question, but like, it could get them curious to go do their own research.
Question?
So, may I?
Yeah.
Sorry. Right.
Oh, you go ahead.
That's all right.
Does anybody else have questions?
Does it help to see if you could have common ground, like, you know, because usually there's a Venn diagram of things you agree on, like conservatives will agree that, you know, there's too much control over drugs and they should be, they believe in freedom, you believe in freedom, so go around with one, or, you know, we both like movies or movies. Or you are a climate skeptic. Oh, I'm a skeptic too. Let's talk about the skeptics.
Yeah, common ground is really good. My best advice is don't lie. Don't pretend like you really like something if you don't, or that you agree with them and you don't. Find the core that you do agree with. I will admit that for a lot of people, they'll resist common ground because common ground can seem like defeat. There was a really funny, it was really sensational. This conservative newspaper went to a liberal college town and they found basically every kid with pink hair or whatever that they could find and asked them, do you think that a child's zip code should determine their future? And they were all, of course, like, no. And they're like, good, you agree with Betsy DeVos. And they were all just like, and they didn't know how to react. And the people who did that were kind of like, see, young college liberals don't know anything. Because we weren't prepared for that, so be prepared for if you try to present common ground, them using it against you. You should go for it. You should. And then in that sort of space, what they could have said is, yes, I mean, I think that's a universal thing that we can all agree to, otherwise that would be kind of cruel, but where we differ is on how we should respond to that. Something like that, to keep yourself defended. You don't want to make yourself look foolish either. But yes, common ground is really important, and push for it, but don't lie about it.
Maybe we have time for like 2 more questions, or turn it back to Juliet.
Quick question. So recently I found myself on the receiving end of the condescending, you don't know anything appeal, but I knew that I did know what I was talking about. And it was one of those things where I didn't feel comfortable in the situation. Like, I was getting very emotional because people were saying like that everything I stood for was wrong. I didn't really know how to deal with the situation without just, you know, crying or something like that. Do you have any suggestions on the being on the receiving end of that kind of thing?
Fast.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, fast.
No, fast.
Oh, fast.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, that's why you have to try to like check in with yourself. And if you get emotional, I mean, it's totally okay. I mean, the biggest thing is like, don't beat yourself up if these things fail. And like, if you start crying or you get really emotional, that's totally cool. I mean, we're all human beings and we all have emotions. If it starts to get really hostile, try to use the fast skills. Try to check in with yourself and be like, okay, are my emotions rising here? And usually what's causing emotions to rise is thoughts you're having about the interaction, where it's like, nobody respects me here, or I feel like an idiot, or everybody's going to think of me as an idiot, or they're laughing at me in their heads. So if you start to think that kind of stuff, just say, okay, you know what, I recognize I'm having these thoughts, and I also recognize they're not helping me, so I'm going to just set them aside and think about something else. And that's usually a pretty good way to keep yourself from crying as well.
One last question.
So you mentioned dealing with white supremacists, and the ones that I've had to deal with, I've had to deal with are typically circular logic, where they don't quite fall into any of, I feel, any of the categories, the kind of pitfalls that you're talking about, where you could say that, okay, no, Democrats aren't trying to keep black people in a poverty state, but then they have another reason why that's true, and that leads back into the other thing, and that leads back into the other thing. How have you dealt with, like, how do you deal with that?
So you have to take away the object of their scorn, basically. If they hate Democrats, or they think Snopes is a conspiracy site, or whatever, just don't talk about that and divert it to a more common ground issue. So it's like, okay, they think Democrats are trying to do X, Y, and Z. Talk about how should we address X, Y, and Z, and try to like pull it away so they can't. You can try to ask them questions, but when you get into that circular logic, they're gonna just keep being like, nope, I'm perfect in my logic. And so it's not very useful. So just try to like pull the conversation aside with the, okay, so what should we do about this? And then ask some questions.
Yeah, I would add to that like, I mean, if you're in a scenario where all they're giving you is circular logic, take a moment to think about what you're trying to do in that conversation, because a lot of times when that's happening, you're trying to get them to see the error of their ways. That's why you keep coming back to the same thing, because you're trying to ask questions that kind of represent to them that this is not logical, and that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is find out more from them. Like if you're hearing the same thing over and over, like that's the reason you want to like divert to another issue, because your goal would be to like have a relationship that's open enough that they feel comfortable sharing, and you know them well enough that you can build a relationship where eventually they might be more open to you. And it's a difficult goal, because you're not going to convince them that their logic is bad, but you are going to create a more open relationship where they might be open to some other things.
So related to that question, I'm going to do this really fast. There are 3 books I really want to recommend. They were all very life-changing for me. And they're really, really good. So undergrad, I kind of specialized in genocide. Awesome topic, I know, but I'm really fun at parties, man. I always ask myself, how quick can I take it to genocide? Yeah, so this book here is written by one of my professors. He is actually a Holocaust survivor, and he researched genocides from political, religious, cultural genocides, and what exactly was happening in all of these countries that led up to this. And so if you really want to understand, like, first of all, never talk about Nazis or Hitler in any of these arguments, because you'll lose immediately. That's just like a thing. And it's really hard because I read this book and I'm always just like, but this is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. That's just not. But it's a really, really good informative book, and I really recommend it because it's really powerful in showing that for all of these extreme things where people just do horrible things to each other, there's a very specific pattern of events that happens, and there are ways to circumvent that. The next one here is more like a social psychology. It goes into like every issue from something like sexual assault and disparity in how victims are treated to how we don't care about poor people and why, basically. And it breaks down each issue really well. And so it's just the social psychology of good and evil. It's a cute title. Then this next one is just the origins of totalitarianism. It looks mostly at Nazi Germany because it's a really popular subject, but it shows you how language gets co-opted to bring people into extreme thinking. Because that's what we're talking about here, is a lot of this like circular logic, all these extreme ideas. It's language, which is how we process everything, has gotten co-opted and like sort of reformed into this weird homunculus of bizarreness that's not really approachable, and that's really what people do to have power over other people. And so The Origins of Totalitarianism is also a really good book on that.
All right. Thank you all very much.
If you are interested in using these kinds of skills to work with the public and to work on science policy issues, that is one of the things that 314 Seattle is trying to do. So at our next meeting, which we haven't scheduled yet, but we'll be sending an email about, we'll be talking about a series of outreach events that will get us going out into communities that don't agree with us, and building relationships and trying to put some of these skills into practice to give a different notion of what a scientist is and how a scientist can talk to you, or how a a person who works in tech can talk to you, or on any of these issues. So please come and put your name on the email list if you are interested in hearing more, whether it's about 314 organizing meetings or about our future events. We'll also be having some future events in the city of Seattle. So yeah, please come talk to us if you have questions, and I or Isaac or any of those people kind of there in the back can help you, can help field questions about 314 and about what we do. Thanks all for coming. Have a good night.
I also brought my card if anybody wants to talk to me more about these things.